Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show today. I'm Jason MacGregor. I'm the host of the MacGregor Wealthcast. Each episode we will be discussing topics we believe to be important to our clients.
And welcome to our podcast this week. Hi everybody, this is Jason MacGregor and welcome to the MacGregor Wealth Management Podcast. I'm your host and today I'm joined by Cory Laird. Cory's certified financial planner here at MacGregor Wealth Management, and welcome, Cory.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Today's podcast is going to be all about how your Social Security benefits are calculated. Now, Social Security is a very broad topic. We could, of course, spend hours talking about all the nuances of different things related to Social Security. But what we want to do is talk about just how the benefits are calculated. And I'll set the stage here and remind everybody that while you are working, let's say you're an employee and you've been working for the last 35, 40 years, you've been paying into a payroll tax system. You've had 6.2% of your wages withheld paying into the Social Security Administration. Your employer matches that 6.2, so a total of 12.4% of your wages have been paid into Social Security. If you're self-employed, you pay a self-employment tax of 12.4%. So that's how the money goes into the system. And the calculations of what your benefit's going to be is, straightforward. It can be a little complex, and we're not going to get totally into the weeds today. But we're going to talk about some of the finer points. And Cory, I'll tee it up here for you. So, I'm a 65-year-old, and I've been working for the last 40 years. I've paid in, and how did they get to the numbers that they're telling me?
Well, let me just say that you look great for a 65-year-old.
Hey, Cory, that's very nice of you. Very nice.
So, the most important acronym here is AIME, what we call AIME. AIME stands for Averaged Indexed Monthly Earnings. And that's basically what's the calculation going on. They being Social Security Administration, look at the highest 35 years. But first, they index that. They bring all your wages up to the same year, and they take the highest 35 years. And they take those 35 years, and they take the average. And then they convert it into a monthly, divided by 12, into a monthly earnings. So that's where averaged indexed monthly earnings, the AIME, comes from. And so that's pretty much where the calculation is determined. Now they take step 2 and they put it, that AIME calculation, they put it onto a 3 bin point calculation. We're not really going to go too far into the weeds there. It's quite complicated, but you can imagine that on that calculation, a little bit of that AIME, you get 90% of it. Some of it you get 32%, and some of it you get only 15%. And so they add those 3 numbers together, and that's what you would get if you waited into your full retirement age, which 66 or 67 or in between.
So you mentioned 35 years.
Yes.
I've got a lot of clients, friends who, maybe they're teachers or state workers, or they work for the local fire police department, and they were talking about their high 3, or you hear about people getting ready for retirement and they take the highest 3 years, or they plow in their overtime. Mm-hmm. So they look at their last 3. Why didn't Social Security do that? Or it's 35 years?
Yeah, so I think that's the reason why we really wanted to do this. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast is because if you are getting close to retirement and you're thinking, well, let's go ahead and increase my income and increase that Social Security, that can be monumental for a 3-year average for a pension. But when it's 35 years, it can certainly increase your Social Security, but maybe by only 2 to 4%.
So you mentioned 35 years, the average. Let's say I was in grad school until I was 30, and I want to retire at 62, or I was staying home with the kids until I was 35. I go back into the workforce. So I go back to the workforce. I work for 30 years, from 35 to 65. I've only got 30 years. What do?
So they add zeros in the average. So they're still averaging out your highest 35, and it just so happens in this example that 5 of those years is a 0.
So that's not good. You take even if you only have 1 0 in there, you take a 0 into a 35-year calculation, that's going to drop that average by about 2.5%, right?
Yeah, 2 to 4%. That's right.
Yeah. So advice to our listeners would be, if you are getting ready to retire, it's always really healthy to get your Social Security SSA, log into your account and look at your earnings record, your earnings history, because it's printed right there for you, and make sure that there are no zeros where there shouldn't be zeros, or if you are getting ready to retire and you've got 34 years paid in, well, consider that would be a consideration to work one more year.
Yeah, and 2 points to that. So let's say that you only put 12 years in the Social Security system, and let's say you're married. That spousal benefit would be probably in that case larger than anything that you could get your benefit up to. So if you've only worked 12 years, you want to work another 6 years to increase your Social Security, you may not be able to increase it higher than your spousal benefit. So which is 50% of what your spouse is getting. So, some words of warning there is that, be careful what you're trying to do. Not be careful, but watch out what you're trying to do, because it takes a long time. It's 35-year average. And so it would take a long time to truly increase it by a substantial amount. Rather, what I would say is, for those who are thinking of working an additional year or two, the actual working an additional year or two has so much more effect to your retirement plan. You're not taking money out of your retirement accounts for another year. You're maybe putting money into the retirement accounts for another year, and you're also earning a wage, you're earning income. All that has a lot more greater effect than increasing your Social Security by another 2% for the rest of your life.
And Cory, I agree with you. That's absolutely good advice. But remember, if you worked for 35 years and the first 2 or 3 years you were, part-time 22-year-old lifeguard, you made $2,000, and now you're a, executive making $100,000. If you work that 36th year that you work, they drop off the low. It's not consecutive 35 years. They go back and they'll pick your highest 35 years. So if you did have exactly 35 years worth of working, and you work that additional year, they would take the higher and drop off the lower. And that is how it's calculated for the rest of your life.
That's right.
So if you're a 63, 65-year-old person, you live 35 more years, that's not inconsequential.
Absolutely.
But, to your point, Cory, it's if you've got that 40 years in and you're thinking you can move your number and, indexed for inflation, those 35 years are kind of the same, that extra year of working is not going to make a material increase on your Social Security benefits. But of course, every year that you work longer, it always makes the retirement plan look that much better.
You're right. So I think, people who are familiar with the pension systems these days, highest 3 years, for Social Security, it's calculated differently, highest 35, of course. But it's also calculated because the longer you wait to take your Social Security, the more you get every year. So if you're 64 years old and you want to wait a year to take your Social Security, your Social Security is going to be about 7% larger. You don't get that with a pension. They pay you more to wait. So not only by working an additional year, you might increase your Social Security by 2 or 3% because you have a higher wage now than when you did 25, 30 years ago. But you also have this waiting an additional year. And so, you put those two parts together, and your Social Security could be about, 8-10% higher than it was the year before.
So, the bottom line is Social Security is calculated by several different formulas or calculation. You've got your AIME or AIME and your PIA and bend points. And, this is a real nice overview of it. We'll keep your eye out for future podcasts when we talk about claiming strategies. That probably gets a lot of questions also is, how should I, or when should I file, and how should I file for Social Security, and how does, being married impact our benefits? That's going to be a whole separate podcast. But today, we just want to talk about how the benefits were calculated. As always, Cory is an excellent resource, a true expert in this field. Keep an eye out for future webinars that Cory hosts on Social Security. And as always, please feel free to give us a call at 518-499-4565. Visit our website at mmwealth.com or shoot us an email at info@mmwealth.com. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to listen to our podcast. Stay well, stay healthy. Talk soon.
MacGregor Wealth Management is registered as an investment advisor with the SEC and only transacts business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability. Information presented does not involve the rendering of personalized investment advice and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation of any offer to buy or sell the securities discussed. Different types of investments involve varying degrees of risk, and there can be no assurance that any investment or strategy will be suitable or profitable for an investor's portfolio. There are no assurances that an investor's portfolio will match or outperform any particular benchmark. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. The tax and legal information contained in this podcast is general in nature. Always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation.